Hello, I'm James Wilson. I'm here to give you a brief lesson on Stedman, Surinam, and the slave trade. Now, it would begin with Africans catching other Africans and then selling them to Europeans to be transported across the Atlantic to the Americas. Now, while they were on these ships being transported, they would be kept down in the hull of the ship for the majority of the time. These holes would be filthy, nasty, and just jam-packed with the slaves. Now, the slaves would be brought up every so often so that they could get some fresh air and to move around. But they were treated very badly. The food was very minimal and they didn't have much of a life on that ship. Now, once they were brought to the Americas, they would be brought to the slave market. At the slave market, they would put like all oil on them in order for them to be uh, have shiny skin, and it made them look healthier, so they could get a better price for the slaves. Now they would be bid on, and the highest bidder would get the slave, who would normally own a plantation. Now most of these slaves would be brought to the plantations and would be field hands, where they would be mistreated very, very bad. Now, if they did not do as they were supposed to, they would be beat and just treated in deplorable manner. Now, once they were working on this plantation, the slaves would have some freedom. They could go to other plantations. They generally, could visit relatives elsewhere, but their travel was very limited and they were restricted. They would have to be back at a certain time in the evening. Now, once you had the Maroons, who were escapees, who would go further up into the rainforest, and they would attack the plantations so that they could get essential supplies that they could not make for themselves in the rainforest. Well, they were doing this on a regular basis. Therefore, the governor requested that he get some soldiers to come over from the West Dutch Indies Company in order to put this insurgency down. Now, in 1775, you had 800 soldiers showed up. They arrived in Surinam, and they were there to stop the insurgents. Well, Stedman met Joanna. Now, this is Stedman's book and his diary do not coincide with each other. And Stedman met this girl, Joanna. In the book, he makes it sound like Joanna is the love of his life, when in all actuality, in his diary, it started out as a different type of relationship. It was more prostitution. Now he tried once he was back in Europe, he wrote the book and he tried to make it like he was more of a civilized than the average European that went over there. And that's all fine and dandy. But in Suriname, Joanna was mulatto, which is half white, half black, and she was born from a white father. Now, Joanna was a slave girl, even though her daddy was free, but he did not set her free. Therefore, she was kept in slavery. All right. In doing so, she met Stedman, and in the book, Stedman makes it sound like they had a great relationship and they fell in love and they eventually had a child and was married, but in his diary, it started off much differently. Whereas her mother actually tried to get him to pay for her to be his concubine. And he said no, she wanted too much money, but evidently something happened to where they ended up getting together. Now, the life of a slave, a mixed breed in Surinam, are quite different than in some other places. Take San Domingo. You had Julian Ramon, who was a mixed breed, which is he was mulatto, however you want to say it, and he actually went to France and worked as a representative for the people of Santo Domingo. Now, he was very wealthy, and he actually owned slaves himself. Now, Stedman makes it sound like, he had contradictions in reference to slavery. He didn't think that they should free the slaves due to the fact of their dependency on the Europeans. And also, it would have caused a disruption in the production of the plantations. He talked about Joanna and very fond memories in the book, and about how he also spoke about how he went on his missions with the Rangers, who would be black slaves that would offer freedom to fight for the colony. And now these Rangers would go upriver with him to fight the rebels that were attacking the plantations. And along the way, they ran into some pretty brutal fights with the elements, not necessarily the rebels. The Europeans had a real rough time because they were not used to the elements in the Americas, and it ended up killing a lot of them, so they had to request more troops. Now, on the second wave of troops, there was 830 of them came over, and they were never able to actually quell the uprising because they could never find the insurgents, or Maroons, however you want to call them. Now, the treatment of the slaves depended on the different on which colony they were in. But most slaves, if you ran away, you could lose a leg. If you were disobedient or didn't follow orders, you could be whipped. And these whips would leave open wounds on your back, and it was very terrible. The treatment was very inhumane, and nobody really deserves that kind of treatment. Now, Stedman, while he was there, he lived in a hut or house, whatever you want to call it, with Joanna. And he makes it sound like they were truly in love, but upon his return to Europe, he immediately got remarried. Now, once he heard of the death of Joanna, he purchased his son and brought him to Europe and raised him in Europe. But he never did, he was never able to actually purchase Joanna in order to be able to bring her back. Of course, Joanna had said that she would not go back with him because of she would cause him to lose his prestige in Europe. And according to the way things were in Surinam, it makes sense because she would have been looked down upon. She had once been a slave, and he had to purchase her. So therefore, was her loyalty to him because he bought her out of freedom, or was it because she still felt she was a slave? Is the way I would think it would be. Now, you have several incidents that have been reported, and like once again, I'm gonna mention Julian Ramon. He went back to Europe, and he was able to help represent the rights of the mixed people in the Saint Domingo, and by doing so, he was able to help bring about more freedoms. Well, he tried to bring about more freedoms and to help them to resist some of the discrimination they faced in Saint Domingo, because he could be brought up on charges by a white man easier than he could bring a white man up on charges. So he felt that they deserved equal treatment, and he owned slaves, and he took it well care of them. I'm sure he had an overseer that mistreated some of the slaves when they did wrong, but in all, slavery as a whole was pretty bad. Now, slavery in the Americas, there was rebellion throughout the entire length of slavery, starting way back in the 1600s with the Spanish first coming there with Cortez and Christopher Columbus, and they they came in and they just took these people's land, and the Europeans felt that they were better than the natives. And this is where all the problem came in. Now, slavery has been around for as long as mankind can remember. You can go all the way back to the Egyptian times and find slavery. And I'm sure there was slavery way before that. Now, just because it was always there doesn't mean it was correct. And in different societies over time, slaves were treated better in some societies. Some societies accepted the slaves into their family, and you had to treat them well. Whereas in some respects, they treated them as property, which they were, because they were bought and sold. In one instance, in Stedman's Surinam, he talks about how a plantation owner got one of the slaves pregnant, and while she was pregnant, he sold her the slave. Now, the other people buying slaves in the area, they put him down. They mocked him for it, but he still was allowed to sell his slave, which is pretty pretty wild. Now, these people they were forced to work. They were fed the minimum amount necessary. They were restricted in the things they could do or say. They were brought here by force, and they were made to work to make other people rich, and they reaped no reward. There was no, guarantee that they would ever be free. They knew that if they did not obey, they would be beat and maimed. The women were sexually abused. So it was not a good thing. So overall, I'd have to say, in conclusion, that slavery was wrong. Nobody deserves to be treated this way, and I hope that we never see this in our life, in this world again. But where you have, in Africa, you still have people who are treated very badly. As late as the 1990s, you had apartheid in South Africa. So it can still go on in different societies. And I'd like to say thank you for giving me your time. Thank you.